I'm William Negley, CEO of SOUNDOFF. Thank you so much for tuning in for our annual Veterans Day event as we continue to share and we support those who have served on their terms.
Good afternoon, everyone. Please take your seats. Thank you for joining us this afternoon on this beautiful day. My name is James Patrick. I'm chairman of the board of SOUNDOFF. And again, I appreciate your time. I know you all have very busy lives. As a Green Beret, the mission of SOUNDOFF holds a very special place in my heart because I have seen firsthand the impact that war and combat has on our veterans and service members. As a matter of fact, just the other week, a friend of mine, former teammate, reached out. I haven't seen him or talked to him in 15 years, emailed me and asked to talk because he was struggling. And we spoke for hours and talked about time on the team, time since active service, just catching up on life and reconnecting. It was very nice to do so. And I was able to connect him with resources because of the mission of SOUNDOFF. And it's not by accident that we hold this fundraiser today on Veterans Day. And to that end, I'd like all veterans in the audience to please stand so we may recognize you for your service, sacrifice, and patriotism. Thank you. And as we get started, I'd ask you to turn your pamphlets to the sponsor page. And I'd like to take a moment to thank all of our donors and sponsors for your incredible generosity and support of our mission and organization. Because of you, we're here today extending the necessary care and access to care through the SOUNDOFF app. So again, thank you so very much for your generosity and kindness. Now, if you would, please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. I would now like to introduce Father Martin Leopold, who will give our invocation for today's meal. Father Martin is pastor at the newly established Mary Mother of the Church parish here in the Archdiocese of San Antonio. Father Martin.
Lord God Almighty, creator of our race and author of peace, we are ever mindful of the cost paid for the liberty we possess. We ask you to bless all who have served and sacrificed in our armed forces. Give them courage, hope, and strength. May they ever experience your firm support, gentle love, and compassionate healing. Strengthen their families, relatives, and friends in their times of concern and anxiety. Be their power and protector, leading them from darkness to light. Lord God, bless our gathering today as a concrete expression of your love and support for these, our brothers and sisters. Bless the food unto our nourishment and our company with an outpouring of your Spirit. Strengthen our hands and enlarge our hearts to bring the blessing that we ask confidently in your most holy name. Amen.
Please enjoy the meal that you have in front of you. Before I introduce William Negley, I wanted to take another brief moment to extend my deepest appreciation for a member of the SOUNDOFF family, and whom many of you know in the room, Alice Carrington-Foltz. Alice was on the board for a number of years and worked tirelessly to help us fundraise, set strategic direction, and really ensure that we are the organization we are today. And while Alice could not join us today, I would like to extend my deepest thanks and appreciation for her support for all that she's done and continues to do. So thank you, Alice. And now it's my privilege to introduce my colleague, business school drinking buddy, and friend, William Nugley, to the stage. William served in the CIA from 2009 through 2016, and also saw firsthand the impact that combat and war has on his friends and those serving overseas, and knew that they struggled and knew that there had to be a better way, and founded SOUNDOFF to address those problems. Please welcome William Nugley.
Thank you all so much for coming. Over the next 10, 15 minutes, I'm gonna bring the room up to date a little bit on some of the most recent data around veteran service member suicide, what it is exactly that SOUNDOFF does, and our role in the broader effort to support veteran service member mental health. Transparently, this is attention every year. Some of you in this room will hear what you already deeply know, what it is that SOUNDOFF does, but there's many in the room who are not familiar with what SOUNDOFF does. And we want to make sure that everybody understands exactly what it is that we do and our role in this space. But I want to emphasize that there's a lot of people in this room, literally or figuratively, without whom SOUNDOFF truly would not exist. SOUNDOFF was an idea born in my head that required a lot of money to bring to creation. And without people like the Mays and Tito's and Hicksons, and you should never list names because you're going to forget some, about half of the King Ranch family, much of my extended family, of course I'm leaving my own family out, much of my extended family, truly we wouldn't be here. And so I just cannot say thank you enough for this ongoing support that has let this valuable mission come to fruition, and I certainly hope that you have seen that. This is a number that some of you may or may not be familiar with. The VA publishes an annual veteran suicide report. The number went down very little bit in 2020, from like 16.7 to 16.5. Fundamentally, it has remained about the same. I want to share with you a study that was released this year by an independent organization named America's Warrior Partnership. It was released at the same time the VA released their annual report. This study looked at how the VA evaluates this number, and they had two conclusions. One, the VA is dramatically undercounting veteran suicide. This is not a definitional issue. This is they are literally missing veteran suicides. And second, that they are not counting what the CDC calls self-injury mortality. So while these are not suicide, these are self-destructive behaviors that lead to death that are, we would posit, connected to service. This would be something like an overdose. And what America's Warrior Partnership, and certainly we would agree with, is that it under-recognizes the significance of this problem if we are not counting those. When you add in these numbers, America's Warrior Partnership estimates the actual number is 44 per day. Whatever number you point towards, we at SOUNDOFF would strongly contend that this is really a symptom of a number of structural problems in how we provide mental health support to veterans and service members in this country. And the problem that we are laser focused on is this right here. This is the whole reason SOUNDOFF exists. 47% of post 9/11 veterans and service members who have deployed, who meet the definition of major depression or PTSD, have not sought help in the last year. This is an extremely well-researched space. There's a dozen studies I can point you to on this. So the question as we reframe this whole discussion is, how is it that we spend billions of dollars a year on this problem? VA, DoD, state, local, nonprofit, and half of the people that are suffering the most don't seek help. I just want to emphasize this. It is common and understandable to look at this problem and say, we have all of these resources, all of these men and women are getting help, and it's just not working. What a tragic situation. That's just demonstrably not the case. Half of the people who are suffering are not engaging with help. The answer is that we do not structure help in a way that it is culturally, bureaucratically, psychologically accessible to the men and women who need it. Again, this is an extremely well-researched space. We know this population isn't seeking help, and we know why they're not seeking help. Let me show you a quote from a Special Operations Command study that was done with the American Association of Suicidology that I think summarizes this quite clearly. I would rather die than admit to having trouble. This quote came from the family member of a Special Operations veteran who died by suicide. Let me show you how we sort of wrap this problem set up. There are 4 primary barriers to entry which prevent veterans and service members from seeking out or effectively engaging with mental health support. Geography, I live too far away. Bureaucracy, it takes too long, it's too complicated, it's too expensive, I may not be allowed to get help. Trust, I don't want to talk to a doctor. I don't want to talk to a doctor, and I don't want to take the meds. And finally, and far and away most significantly, a personal and professional desire for anonymity. We don't typically talk about that way. What we talk about is stigma. But it is important to distinguish cultural stigmatization. I don't want my friends, family, community to know that I am seeking help, from a concern of professional blowback. 2 separate things, both real or perceived to be real. This is where SOUNDOFF enters the picture. SOUNDOFF is an IT platform that allows veterans and service members the ability to develop long-term relationships with clinicians or screened and trained peers we call battle buddies while maintaining complete anonymity. We assign that veteran or service member a unique username. They come back to the platform engaging with that same clinician or peer and hence maintain their anonymity. So let me show you, I've learned the lesson to not demo live, exactly what this looks like. What you're seeing here is a clinician who's already onboarded onto our platform and a veteran or service member who's never touched our system before. We ask the veteran or service member seeking help for a password. Again, we've not collected email, we've not collected any identifying information. We get a second PIN, and this is the whole magic behind SOUNDOFF. This veteran service member, we are going to label White Fox 174. We don't know anything about them except that they've self-identified as a veteran service member and they're White Fox 174. So we're into our 3 channels of support. Claire is a clinically validated chatbot. We partner with a company called X2AI. We have our peer support and our clinical support. I'm going to come in and say I was with Naval Special Warfare. If you want to talk to a clinician, you have to tell us what state you're in. So I come in and say I was in Texas, and I'm into the list of clinicians that I can engage with. I'm going to say I want to talk to Billy Crystal. So I select Billy Crystal, and I go through our informed consent. Shout out to Dykema for the tremendous support that they've provided in our legal documentation. And we're dropped into an end-to-end encrypted conversation between Billy Crystal and White Fox. White Fox says, hey, can we talk next week sometime? Billy Crystal's going to come back and say, let's talk Friday at 5. What you're going to see Billy Crystal, our clinician, do is hit that little phone icon in the top right-hand corner. And what happens here is a VoIP call is placed internal to the application so they're able to have a session without needing to know that individual's name, email, phone number, or any identifying information. We wrap up our session. We worked with Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute to develop a set of surveys to demonstrate organizational and clinical efficacy on what it is that we do. So we wrap up our calls. and we say, same time next week, and we schedule our appointment for next week. So let's return to those core barriers to entry that we are working to address. Geography. The only geographic limitation is that that clinician is licensed in the state that the veteran or service member's in. We handle that at an engineering level, and what is arguably uniquely efficient about what it is that we do is that if we have a clinician who's licensed in Texas and Alaska, we can connect that clinician with anybody in either one of those states. Bureaucracy, you've just seen the entire experience for that veteran service member coming in. Trust, we allow them to engage with a screened and trained peer or a clinician. And what's better is that that peer can basically act as a Trojan horse. They say, I'm not ready to talk to a clinician, I'll talk to somebody that's been there, and then a week, a month, 6 months later, they say, you know, I really should talk to a professional. They don't need to go find an organization or find a clinician. They can hit a button and talk to a clinician. And finally, and far and away most significantly, why we started this foundation and where we stand differentiated is true, uncompromising anonymity. This is not confidentiality. This is not, I know who you are, but I promise, I won't tell anyone. I like to say the police could knock on my door and say, tell me who White Fox is, and our answer would be, I literally cannot answer that question. I can point you to the clinician and what that individual seeking help has chosen to disclose to that individual, but I'm a dry hole. So let's return to SOUNDOFF's role in this broader effort. Where do we fit in this broader veteran service member mental health? This is a critical element about where we fit. If someone is going to the Ecumenical Center, Endeavors, Headstrong, Cohen Network, the VA, DOD, I want them doing that. Our target audience is the 47% that is definitionally not doing that. But organizationally, what does that mean? It means I'm not competing with anybody in a space that can, quite frankly, get a little sharp elbows. I'm not competing with anybody. If they're engaged with help, I want them doing it. And furthermore, not only am I not competing with anybody, SOUNDOFF's method of growth scale is directly through organizational partnership. SOUNDOFF is really fundamentally a technology force multiplier. I don't spend $1 paying for mental health support for Navy SEALs or Green Berets or Marine Raiders. I don't spend $1 trying to talk to Navy SEALs, Green Berets, or Marine Raiders. I partner with the foundations that do that all day long, are connected in those communities, and are raising the philanthropic money to do that. This is what we shared last year, and it's a tremendously powerful model when you're considering philanthropic ROI. We are using, as one might say, other people's money to support this community. And in partnership with them. We give everybody recognition. It's not us, it's a partnership. And what does that partnership look like? What do these organizations do? Fundamentally, 3 things. They tell their community, hey, if you're struggling and you don't feel safe accessing help through currently available channels, here's this trusted partner organization. They bring us screened, ideally trained peers. We do not provide peer support training, but we vet peer support training. And then finally, they help fill the clinical capacity through volunteers, through staff, or through dollars. So before we transition to the panel, I want to share a tremendously exciting piece of news with the room today. About 6 months ago, the VA released what it called Mission Daybreak. Mission Daybreak. This was a $20 million grand challenge to bring innovation into the veteran suicide space. So The VA received 1,400 applications from universities, from nonprofits, from mental health providers, from academics, to bring innovation into the veteran service member space. We were one of 40 of those 1,400 to be recognized. This is a tremendously and, quite frankly, personally meaningful recognition of the work that we do. It is worth emphasizing one thing about this, though. When the VA was evaluating us, they were not evaluating our organization per se. What they were evaluating was the model of support that we provide. A lot of organizations with a lot more money than us were sending in applications. But they were not looking at our organizational efficacy. They weren't looking at how much money we raised. They weren't even looking at how many people we'd helped. They were looking at what it is that we do different to try and move the needle on this problem. And it's just a very meaningful distinction, because there's a lot of organizations, again, that are bigger than us in this space. So, that's the super exciting, make your day great update on what it is that SOUNDOFF does, the latest date on veteran service member suicide. I'm going to ask our panel, Tony, Sydney, Aaron, to come up. And we're just going to keep this thing rolling, so we're all out of here on time. Congressman Tony Gonzalez is a dedicated patriot with 20 years of military experience. Abandoned by his father at the age of 2 months, Tony knew he had to work hard to get ahead in life. And at the age of 18, he left high school to join the military and provide a path to success for himself and his family. As a career cryptologist in the U.S. Navy, he rose to the highest enlisted rank of Master Chief Petty Officer and deployed multiple times in support of operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. Tony has firsthand experience with the security challenges that face our country and the international community at large. Harnessing his military background, Tony also served on Capitol Hill as a Department of Defense Ledge Fellow for U.S. Senator Marco Rubio. In his time there, he continued to work defense, foreign policy, and intelligence portfolios. In 2018, Tony was selected as National Security Fellow at the Foundations for Defense and Democracies. At home in San Antonio, Tony is an active member of his community and has helped to create educational and economic opportunities in impoverished areas. Congressman Gonzalez is married to his wife, Angel, and they have 6 wonderful children. Aaron is a retired Navy SEAL where he served as a specialized medic, sniper, airborne leader, and jump school instructor. He's a graduate of the Harvard Business School, a father, and a husband in Scottsdale, Charo. Mr. Kendall is a decorated member of the U.S. Navy, served as a member of SEAL Team 7, Naval Special Warfare Group 1 Training Detachment, and Naval Special Warfare Development Group, aka DEV Group, over a 15-year career, and has dedicated his post-military professional career to helping his fellow brothers in arms transition back to civilian life. After a 15-year career as a SEAL, he stepped into the role as CEO of the SEAL Future Fund, as an organization created to help former SEALs transition to civilian life. He has dedicated his post-military career to helping his fellow brothers in arms. Aaron is married to his wife, Mindy, and they have 2 darling children. My sister, Sydney Negley Mulder, became a passionate advocate for SOUNDOFF after personally witnessing her husband's struggles with the military healthcare system, specifically those active duty. She experienced the tragedy of veteran suicide firsthand when her husband, Bill Mulder, died by suicide only 127 days after leaving a decorated 20-year career in Naval Special Warfare, much of it at Development Group. Sydney courageously shares her story and Bill's to raise awareness for suicide prevention. Her hope is to share Bill's life and legacy and to continue to make their 3 children proud. Thank you all so much for coming today, for being with us. You all have unique angles on this problem, on this experience, and I really have 3 objectives in the next 20 minutes or so. We've just heard about the statistics around suicide, veteran suicide, but I want to emphasize to the room on a more personal level just how bad this problem is. Because I think for those outside of this community, sometimes they are shocked to learn just how prevalent and common this problem is. And then the second objective is to just discuss a little bit the challenges faced when seeking support. We put a lot of money into this. Why is this challenging? And then thirdly, just why it is hard to systemically fix this problem, like at a policy level. So I want to start the conversation off with the day that I know, Sydney, Aaron, in particular to you all, is particularly meaningful, August 6, 2011. And before we talk about what exactly happened that day in Extortion 17, Aaron, if you can share for just a few minutes just kind of what that mission set would look like. You're a Dev Group SEAL in Afghanistan. What does that look like?
The deployments for us at the time with Dev Group were 4-month deployments. So we spent 4 months overseas. We were back for approximately 1 year before you're on your next deployment. Obviously, during those years that I was in, op tempo was high. We'd share time with the Rangers, going out on operations. Whoever was out had the other kind of ready to go in support. So even if you weren't operating, you were ready to operate, and a lot of times you still went if they needed backup. So op temp was high, but morale was high too, and that's what guys are there for. That's what we're all there for, is to work during that period of time. You know, obviously that August 6th was one of those actions, the largest loss of life for naval special warfare.
Let me share with the room, if I can, just a quick video here on what is exactly that happened that day.
President Obama paid tribute today to the 30 U.S. troops killed over the weekend in Afghanistan, and he vowed to press on there and succeed. The Americans, including 22 Navy SEALs, were killed when their helicopter was shot down in Wardak Province. David Martin reports their remains will be flown tomorrow to Dover Air Force Base in Delaware.
It will take 2 transport planes to bring all the flag-draped caskets home. 30 Americans were aboard that Chinook helicopter when it went down. A crash so horrific their remains have not yet been identified. A shocking loss for the nation, an indescribable one for the stepfather of Navy SEAL Brian Bill.
We're heartbroken. We mourn more than anything else his life of unfulfilled dreams. He was already an accomplished mountaineer, skier, pilot, and triathlete.
As families and friends of the 30 who died on Saturday came forward, we learned that the youngest, door gunner Spencer Duncan, was just 21. His friends back in Kansas can hardly believe it.
I think numb is a great way to describe it for now.
Even harder to comprehend for people in Shreveport, Louisiana, where Lieutenant Commander Jonas Kelsall and Chief Petty Officer Robert Reeves played on the same high school soccer team.
The war comes home to you when it's a neighbor, when it's a hometown boy. And here we've lost 2 of them.
Among the oldest is 36-year-old Kevin Houston, one of 22 Navy SEALs aboard the helicopter. Matt Mills had been a SEAL for 10 years, which means he was a veteran of countless nighttime raids. The SEALs aboard the Chinook were assigned to back up another team which had hit a compound in the Tangi Valley west of Kabul, looking for a local Afghan leader. The team got pinned down in a firefight and called for help. The Chinook, with the 30 Americans, 8 Afghans, and 1 dog aboard, was apparently hit by a rocket-propelled grenade as it came in. A Taliban commander told CBS News the man the SEALs were looking for wasn't there. We had all our forces in position to defend our valley, he said, and our commander is alive and well.
Earlier this afternoon, the aircraft carrying the Americans took off from Afghanistan for the final journey home. They will arrive at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware tomorrow morning. Anthony?
David Martin at the Pentagon. Thanks, David.
So we are not the Navy SEAL Foundation, obviously. So why are we bringing this up? Because, and this, I'm going to hand it over to you all. I know, Sydney, Aaron, this was a very personally meaningful day for each of you. And Tony, I know that you served in support of a very similar experience when the SEALs lost another helicopter. That was what, 2 years before that, something like that. So let me hand it over to you all and talk us through where you were, what it meant in the context of obviously this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could start with just maybe background with Sid and I. When I got to the East Coast, the Dev Group, the house that I moved into happened to be right across the street from Sid and her husband Bill. And he was at Silver Squadron at the time. I was at Gold. He had come from Gold Squadron, so obviously we had a lot of friends in common, and it was actually just it was a great period in our life, I think. You know, it was a great. Gold would deploy, and Silver would relieve us overseas. I kind of tell a joking story of my wife, one of the first deployments she did with me, and I was over in Afghanistan, and I get these text messages from her, and she's like, it's 911. I'm thinking somebody's breaking into the house. I don't know what's going on. I'm kind of paralyzed, but I get her on the phone, and she starts yelling at me, and she's like, "There's a snake in the backyard." And I mean, one, I was relieved, but two, I was like, "Go get Bill across the street. Why are you calling me over here? You know, like you have Bill there." So it was a team, and it was a family that we had there. And you know, obviously going to August 6th, I was a part of Gold Squadron. I was in 3 Troop. The guys that you're hearing about up there were in 2 Troop. And my roommate at the time was one of the guys, and I mean, all best friends and brothers. And we had got back in from an operation, us personally. We were down in Kandahar, and I had just done all our stuff to clean up, and had just gone into my rack when I got a knock on my door from my team leader. And he didn't say anything except, you know, get to the jock, which is our kind of office command. And when we walked in there, at the time, obviously, all you could do was watch the ISR footage of a burning helicopter. And then, you know, realizing that a good chunk of your friends were on there. And, you know, then we played this hope game for the next few hours of, hey, I heard so-and-so wasn't on there. He was somewhere else. Nope, he was too. And then we played that back and forth. And after the realization came after the next few hours that it was the entire troop plus some, we just kind of shut down operations there. And we all flew into Bagram. And the Rangers were great. They were the ones that stayed on target for multiple days and recovered all those bodies and brought them back. You know, it talked about setting off, and so we made sure that we were the ones that were in charge when those guys got back to Bagram, that we took charge of that, and you know, got them home safely. And then, of course, we had the job of going back to their compound, their base they were at, and we had to pack up all their stuff, which honestly was like a ghost town. You know, computers were open, emails half written. It was just, you know, everybody that was there was gone. Stayed about a week there, and they did a good job. I mean, they did send guys out, a lot of shrinks, a lot of chaplains. But of course, you know, we're a bunch of alpha males there, and we're all kind of just dealing with it on our own. And, you know, nobody really talked to them. The attitude was, well, they don't really know what I'm going through, so what's the point? You know, and they tried, and I just don't think we really, I mean, I personally wasn't open to it at the time. I think there was a lot of anger there, obviously a lot of hurt that led to anger. And it was just more like, get me back out there. I don't need to talk to somebody. I just need to keep doing what we were here to do. You know, and there was something that was said on that video about Brian Bill's dad that I almost disagree with, because those guys died doing what they loved. I know every single one of those guys died doing what they loved. I almost think kind of the harder part is us that are left behind here.
Sid, let me let you tell the story of both where you were and the context behind that on that day, and the implications for you and Bill, and then arguably Bill, bigger picture.
Sure. That is was such a critical day for Bill and for us and for our family. He was on Gold Squadron as well, so those were his brothers, his teammates, and we were here in San Antonio at the time. In 2009, Bill and I moved here to take a break. He was really burnt out, and we came here to be closer to my family. We had a couple of kids, and I've shared this story before. We were watching the news. Bill had been fielding phone calls for a couple of days from his buddies, and I was talking to a bunch of the spouses from that day who I am still very, very close with, and we're sitting and we're watching the news, and we're sitting on our couch here in San Antonio, and we're quiet for a minute, and I look at him, and he looks at me, and I'm crying, and he's crying, and we just nodded to each other. We just silently, quietly nodded, and I said, "We need to go back," and he said, "We need to go back." And 3 months later, we were back in Virginia Beach. We knew that, it was just, their deaths were so not in vain. That was just the primary reason is why we moved back to Virginia Beach and why I'm still there. And I'm still very close with all of those spouses, and it remains just a very pivotal point in my life with Bill.
To put it in my words, which, because he was my brother-in-law, I think I'm allowed to. I mean, here, Bill, you all have moved to San Antonio. Perhaps the word is not escape, but to try and let Bill decompress. And this tragic event and call to service rips him right back into it.
Absolutely.
And of course, we know, the ultimate outcome of that. Tony, Red Wing and/or extortion?
Yeah, people always ask me, how many times did you deploy to Afghanistan or Iraq? And it's all just kind of a blur. I mean, we'd go out for 3 months, come back for a month, go out for 3 months, probably a dozen times. And all this reminds me, William, Aaron, Bill, all of us that served, we're part of this class, and I call it the warrior class. And it has nothing to do with your economic background or your race or religion. It's just this warrior class. And so as a member of Congress, I'm excited that there's more people in the warrior class getting in the political fight and being able to represent us at a different level. The other thing I'd say, too, is the warrior class wants to work. Like, we're just that horse or the ox that just always wants to just go to work. So when I hear something goes bad, you would just want to go to work. It's very real. So as a member of Congress, often, you talk about the bureaucracy. You get to see it firsthand. And look, I sit on the Appropriations Committee. One of my subcommittees is Veterans Affairs. So guess where the VA is getting their money from, right? The power of the purse is real. They're getting it from the House. And so, we can I'm able to ask some real questions to them to get real responses to it. But and I want to tie in SOUNDOFF here, one of the most memorable moments for me in my first term in Congress has been, everyone and their mother has my cell phone number. I made it a point to just be very accessible. And I remember it's a Friday night, and a buddy of mine sends me a text message. He's like, I know you're busy, but I'm really struggling tonight. And I'm like, yeah, what's going on? We're just kind of going back and forth. And he goes, I can't wait till Monday. He's like, I know you can help me out with the VA, and you've got a great team, but I need something today. And that's when I was able to go, I got you, man. I got you. Here you go. Download this app, and literally you can get going within minutes. And so then there was a pause, and then a guy hits me up about an hour later and was like, I've downloaded the app. This has been amazing. So it's that type of thing. Not everything is billions. Some of it is billions of dollars through the bureaucracy and getting to where it needs to be. But it's organizations like this that are, whether they're nonprofits or faith-based, that are going to places no one else is going to. Because the warrior class isn't going to ask for help. They're just always going to suck it up and just make it work. But we owe it to them, because they've sacrificed so much. And I say this all the time. Oftentimes you have no idea what a person is going through, what it takes for them to get up in the morning, get through the day, go to bed at night. And we owe it to them to always be there for them, not Monday through Friday, always, and for them to not feel as if they're victims, but just to go. I won't speak for you, but I mean, I'm an OIF veteran. I don't like going to I'm not going to go to the VFW. I'm not going to go to the American Legion. I don't want to talk about my time in Kandahar. I don't want to talk about my time in Balad or these other things. Like, I just want to go about my business. And there's a lot of people that are in that same, our generation is that same type of deal. How do I get my meds? How do I get my counseling? And then how do I go back and chill with Netflix or whatever?
Yeah. So we've heard the data and the more personal, sort of testaments to how significant and common this problem is. I want to go to, this just can be sort of a counterintuitive thing. I mean, Tony, exactly to what you just said, we spend a lot of money on this problem. Why does this problem exist? Aaron, I mean, Dev Group is covered up in clinicians. Like, if clinical capacity was the answer here, there would be no problem. Why does this problem exist? Sydney, you obviously saw it firsthand with Bill as well.
I mean, I'm obviously no expert up here, but I mean, in my own humble opinion, like what I said was, at the time, I almost think we didn't really take time to even comprehend what had really happened. You know, it was just, it got dumped on, but we were still there to do a job. You know, we didn't even get to go home. And we didn't want to go home. We wanted to stay there and finish the deployment. And we wanted to continue to honor our brothers and bring the fight to the enemy, because that's what they would have done in the roles being reversed. And you get really good about, I kind of just use the term of like putting things in a box. You know, it's like the mission comes first. We all know that. Because it's bigger than just any one of us or even the group of us. We know that we're out there and we've done countless operations where we know, like, hey, if one of us doesn't come back, that's just what it is. That's just what we've signed up to do. So you get good about just, you put it in the box and you sit on it, you stand on it, you do whatever it takes to just keep it closed, and you keep moving forward. Personally, I mean, that box starts to come apart for me personally. It did. Maybe I don't even know the exact time frame, but slowly but surely that started to come apart for me. And I know that I went from, I know my work ethic as a young SEAL was just like to be there, whatever needed to be done, I'd do it. And I started losing that focus. I obviously probably turned more to alcohol and other things during that time. And I looked around, and I was kind of one of the younger guys in that group. And everybody else seemed to be doing good too, you know? And so I was just like, okay, well, everybody else is fine with this and they're going with the mission, so that's what I've got to do as well. And so I Charlie Miked, I continued on. And it wasn't until years later, leaving the East Coast, going back to the West Coast, that I really had an opportunity to take a look back and just realize how much that affected me personally, and how I just avoided all communication about it. My thing was, it's better not to talk about it than to say anything at all. And like I said, I don't want to say that there were negativities about talking about it, but it just, in the community, nobody spoke about it. We were talking earlier this week, and I'd mentioned how when I was a brand new SEAL, it was like, if you got physically injured, you were kind of weak. You know, if you got hurt in training, guys would make jokes, oh, you got to go rehab, and you'd be out of the fight for a little bit. And nobody wanted to be that. But then they started putting a lot of money into fixing guys up physically, where you'd go ahead of time. If my shoulder was hurting, now I'd go to rehab ahead of time so I wouldn't be out of the fight. But what kind of slid in behind that is what turned out to be like this mental health aspect that we talk about now of you know, I am hurt, but I don't want to talk about it because I don't really want to tell anybody. I don't want to take myself out of the fight, and I don't want my buddies to I don't want them to think I'm out of the fight. I want them to trust me 100% completely, because that's what this job takes. It takes that 100% trust on the guys to your left and right. And in my head, you didn't want to be that guy that maybe wasn't 100%.
I would completely piggyback on that and say the deployment pace and the mission pace that you guys were on. As the spouse, I felt that at the time the cycles were 4 months deployed, I think you said, right, Aaron? Yes, 4 months on, 4 months home, 4 months training. So yeah, I think it was that unless you give yourself space to step away and take a knee and say, and have some space between that pace that you guys were on. I mean, that's what I saw with Bill very personally. He didn't have even time to take a knee and say, I'm really hurting, I'm really struggling. So I think, yes, I think we're seeing the effects of this 20+ year active war, right? And just if you can give yourself a minute and give yourself some space from that, then you can actually be aware of it, right?
And you know what, Sydney? It's also the families, too. You made a great point. You know, my two oldest children, when we finally started settling down in Pensacola, my oldest daughter goes to me, she was in 8th grade, she goes, Dad, I've been to school in 5 different states. You know, is there any way I can finish out here? So what the family went through when the snakes in the backyard, you know, and everything else that didn't get the call, you know, is the aspect of it too. And so to lose some of these people, whether physically lose them or mentally they get removed from the fight, now the family is having to just pick up the pace. And no one really talks about that enough either.
So Sid, I want you, again, some in the room will have heard this story, but you know, jumping to the point in particular with Bill where it was very clear he was struggling, not to everyone, but certainly to you. I mean, can you recount the experience in engaging with Bill when you were very precisely encouraging him to seek help?
Sure. It was a very long struggle, and it was a lot of arguing and a lot of there were many tireless conversations about seeking help, and I think I've said this before, how many therapists I dragged him to find the right fit, and yoga, surfing, hiking, you know, we tried to utilize those resources that were available to him. The command psych, you're right, that Dev group was covered up in clinicians, and not battle buddies, but clinicians, but he was not able to engage with them because of the stigma, which is just so real. I saw it, I still see it. So the various clinicians that I took him to and forced him to go to, and he was never able to be open and honest with them, and simply because of the fear of that legitimate professional blowback. And my God, so many arguments ending in, don't you dare tell anybody, I'll get shit canned from the command, I will lose my security clearance. And so as the spouse, I'm like, well, shit, okay, I don't want that, so I won't say anything. So it was so isolating, and so it was just terrifying. I didn't know we didn't know where to go because of it was the stigma. It was the very real stigma that still exists.
Thank you, Sid. So I wanna ask Tony, Aaron, one final question, and then we'll wrap up our panel here. Again, there's a lot of money put at this problem, but the data on, let's say, the inefficacy of helping more or less half of those people, why? And I don't think there's a good answer, so to some degree I'm not expecting a great answer, but why is that problem, that gap, such a challenging thing to systemically address? And when I say systemically, I mean DoD, VA policy, and then even at the nonprofit level. We can have all the money in the world, but half these guys aren't coming and getting help.
Well, you're including government in the equation. You include government in the equation, and that automatically goes down a completely different hole. That oftentimes in Washington we pass these bills or we appropriate this money, and everyone gives themselves a high five and going, look at all these amazing things that we're doing for fill in the blank, right? Could be in this case veterans, and then you move on, and that money never makes it to where it needs to go. It gets stuck along the way, and all this stuff. and there's a lot of redundancy in some of these different things. So what I appreciate about this organization is, one, it utilizes technology as a way to get ahead of that problem set. I'm a cryptologist by trade, so I appreciate that. And the other aspect of it is it's real. You can touch it, you can feel it. It's not a theoretical, what if you give me this, magic beans. I mean, it's already working. I've seen it work, and I think there needs to be more of that. The other piece to it too is yes, I'm an OIF vet, and that this is my generation, my war. But I'm telling you, I see the next generation as also not wanting to sit down in a traditional environment. It's getting further removed from that, going into the brick and mortar. I mean, they're worse than us. I mean, we don't want to. They really don't want to communicate with anyone. So I look at kind of going forward, the next war that we have, or to get ahead of some of this. When you talk about preventive maintenance, you talk about preventive. It's not just for OIF vets that kind of did that stuff. It's also for what's happening now. I mean, a lot of these things, even we were in the fight, but in today's environment, that fight is happening from a drone somewhere. And guess what? That messes with you too, right? So it's not as if you don't have PTSD because you didn't get bullets downrange. So that's why I look at this organization as not only for the current time, but forward-leaning on the next problem set.
And yeah, I'll just piggyback right off of that too. And I would say the other problem is one size does not fit all. And there are so many things out there, and I've watched guys go to clinic after clinic, and they have NICO and all these things out there, and guys would go, and maybe it helps a little bit, maybe it doesn't help at all. Sometimes, looking back at my teammates, I can see that we all struggled differently. Not everybody struggled like I did, and for the same reasons. We all know how intricate the brain is and how it's affected. It's just we can't figure out what it is and what it's done. If Sid's all right with it, I mean, the day that Bill took his life, like I said, I was on the West Coast at the time running a nonprofit to help guys transition, and was in communication with Bill frequently, and we had talked about things. They were talking about moving to Texas. He had wanted to open up a hunting ranch, and we spoke. I think it was 3 p.m. San Diego, and it was on speaker. He said hi to Mindy and Dylan, and I said, hey, it's Friday afternoon. Let's talk on Monday. And he said, great. And Saturday morning, I woke up, and I had our youngest downstairs, and Mindy came downstairs just bawling. And and she told me, she said, Bill took his own life yesterday. And I was like, no, it was almost, I couldn't believe it. I said, no, I was like, Bill? I'm like, no, I just, and honestly, after talking with Sid, it turns out that this was 30 minutes prior. I mean, and that's when I really, obviously we started talking more, and just how in depth and how different people are, and how Sid said, like, when he talked to me, I thought I brought my wife in. I said, you heard him, right? Like, did we miss something here? Was there something that we missed? And Mindy was like, no, he was totally Bill, the Bill we knew and loved. And then, of course, I didn't realize where Bill was mentally at the time until afterward, and talking to Sid, and she was like, yeah, he could make that change. And so something like this with the technology, sometimes it's not going to a clinic for weeks at a time, or going on a Grand Canyon hiking retreat like Sid and I did, which is awesome too. But sometimes you're in that spot and things are bad, and you just got to reach out, and you just need somebody to talk to, whether it's a clinician or just somebody that knows what you're going through. So obviously, through all the things in mind, SOUNDOFF carries a spot in my heart for what all they do.
Thank you for that. I think the anonymity piece is just, it's worth repeating over and over again. It is the most significant piece about SOUNDOFF, and what is so different, and what is so personal that I can speak to, because that was the number one thing that Bill and I struggled with, was was being able to talk to somebody and engage without that fear of professional blowback. So it's so deeply personal to me, obviously, but that anonymity piece, you're right, not every person suffers the same, and but just the anonymity is so significant.
Let's give our panel a round of applause. I just want to share one more detail for the room, because it's a mistake that is often made, but I think really speaks to the power of this organization. SOUNDOFF did not launch because of Bill's death. I was doing this for years beforehand, and this problem is so insidious, it was going on in my own family, and I wasn't aware of that. So it just, you know, it's a very real thing. So for the next few minutes, we're going to talk about a little bit more about where we're headed, and then I promise we're gonna wrap up. I shared with you all before the panel that when the VA looked at our organization for Mission Daybreak, they were not evaluating our organization per se. They weren't looking at our fundraising or economic efficiency. This room and the supporters and donors of this organization might quite reasonably want to evaluate us on the efficiency and economic efficiency of this organization. And of course, one of the big things that people look at when they look at nonprofits is your head count, your overhead. And 12 months ago today, we had one staff member. I'm here to apologize that over the last 12 months, we've let ourselves go a little bit, and our head count has expanded to 2. And I've only gotten the question about Elizabeth Reed about a dozen times today already. I like to say that Elizabeth is the second best relationship that I've chosen to enter. She's an absolute rock star, and we were lucky to bring her over after her time at Goodwill San Antonio. And of course, she came down with strep last night. So that's why she's not here today. Truth be told, this isn't exactly accurate. We transitioned from a third-party contract software developer to 3 in-house, effectively staff software developers. But this was ultimately a net zero impact to us, because we're obviously not paying our software developer or the contract firm anymore. So Elizabeth comes on in February, and we have to take what is, you know, the better part of almost a decade of SOUNDOFF in my head and share it with Elizabeth so that we can execute together. And of course, I'm starting to talk about SOUNDOFF, and I feel like I'm like this, right? I'm just spitting brilliance here. And I think Elizabeth looks at me and thinks it's a little more like this, right? Like, what is this guy talking about? So we really had to distill down, you know, okay, what are we doing here? What's the strategy? Where are we going? And we did that in just a super simple structure, what we called star 1, star 2, star 3 objectives. And that's just kind of what I want to share with you a little bit today. And this is the exact quote of what we had on our planning guide of what star 1 was. You know, a year ago today, we shared our initial set of partners, Special Forces Charitable Trust, Navy SEAL Foundation, and we were working together to support those communities. The structure, the mechanics of that partnership was quite admittedly extremely nascent. There were things that we just still needed to figure out and get working. We needed to be billing on a weekly basis. We needed them to be sending us battle buddies. We needed to make sure we had adequate clinical capacity where it mattered to them. We needed to make sure that they were sharing with their community, that this was a resource. So this was, you know, objective 1. We've got these partners. Let's just make sure, again, to use the metaphor I've used 100 times over the last year, this engine is turning just at 1 RPM. So we accomplished that within a couple of months. Basically, by about April, we had that initial set of partners, you know, kind of cycling. They were bringing us peers. We were doing what we needed to do. And while this was not exactly a set objective, we were clearly focused on operating within the special operations community, and we wanted to cover all of SOCOM, Special Operations Command. And we're excited to say that while there are a few more organizations that we want to partner within SOCOM, we are today partnered with and covering all of Special Operations Command, including with Marine Raider, who's here, TACP, the UNIT Foundation, and many others. So we moved into really important, really boring STAR 2. So I did not launch SOUNDOFF to help 50, 100, or even 500 members of the Special Operations Command. We set out to bring true scale to this problem. That required a lot of work. Things that were extremely mechanical, manual, needed to be automated, system built. To give just a few little examples. Again, really boring, but really important stuff. Pindo allows clinicians and peers to train themselves on our application when they come on. So when we bring a clinician or peer on, we're not having to do a Zoom call anymore and say, hey, you do this and this and this. The application teaches them how to do it. ID.me allows veterans, peers, to validate that they are veterans. We don't want veterans that, peer supporters who are claiming to be veterans who aren't actually veterans. Stripe, this bottom left hand, allows us to automate identity validation. So people hold up their this is for people providing help, not seeking help. Hold up their driver's license, they take a little selfie, it says, yep, this is who you are. Finally, verifiable, automates licensure, clinical licensure validation. So up until, now, a month ago, clinician comes on, I want to provide help. Okay, what's your number? We're going to the website, we're doing the thing, we're validating, yes, that's right. Now it is an entirely automated, instantaneous process. Really boring, really important if the objective here is to drive true scale in helping address this problem. We're excited to call STAR 2 done today. That we can bring theoretically, thousands of clinicians or peers on with very little to minimal manual involvement. And by the way, very minimal marginal cost. These are not expensive things once built. So we're into STAR 3. And this is the whole reason we've been doing this. To now partner with an ever-growing number of organizations who can bring tremendous scale to helping address this problem. And what is particularly powerful is that those organizations are not homogeneous in what they are doing. We have organizations like Marine Raider, who's cutting a check, to put it bluntly, and telling their community. We have organizations who are just peer supporters. We are working with organizations that are just clinicians. The system can adapt to all of that. And I want to give one prime example of really the power of what it is that we have built. TACP Foundation is our newest Special Operations Community partner. TACP's, forgive me, any veterans in the room if I get this not totally precise, but basically our command, control, directing, close air support, fire in support of predominantly conventional military units. So they're the ones talking to the plane saying, please put the bomb right there. It's also a very small community. So they had their annual reunion last week, invited me down to speak about the new partnership and to try and bring on some peers from their population into our platform. In 1 hour, we had more people seeking help and more new supporters than any time in the history of this organization other than when we were on the CBS Evening News. TACP has a brand new peer support network that cost them literally nothing and cost me very close to nothing because we have invested in the technology to allow this. So now, when someone comes in, says, I'm with TACP, they're gonna see a vetted, validated peer supporter from their community, sponsored by the TACP Foundation, available to speak to them. That cost us basically nothing, margin cost, obviously tremendous initial investment. This is the power of what it is that we have been working towards. And we are now in a position to take exactly that experience and that model and replicate it over and over and over. So it's a tremendously exciting time that is, again, only possible with your support. And so now, of course, let's talk about the money. Let's talk about that support. So our objective through this event was to raise about $600,000 at about what is about a $60,000 a month burn rate. So the $600,000, the idea was that this would carry us through next summer, coming into the new year strong. I'll talk about how close we are to that. But just to emphasize, I think most would acknowledge that is a fairly economically efficient model when we talk about the scale of what we're able to do. Because to emphasize just one thing, that does not reflect the money that these other organizations are bringing to us. So Special Forces Charitable Trust, Navy SEAL Foundation, Marine Raider, this number is not that money, nor is it the value of the support that those peers are providing or pro bono clinicians are providing. We really need to move to a budget range of about $1.5 million a year, so that's about $125,000 a month. That delta, that gap, is really about, as we talk about STAR 3, the need to have a little more on-the-ground presence around the country. Again, not paying for clinicians and not paying for peer supporters, but having somebody around Fort Bragg, having somebody around Dam Neck who can go and speak into that community and help drive some of that scale. I mean, the hard part investment's already been made. Now you're just, how much do you want to layer up on that? So we're coming into the new year with an objective to move to that $1.5 million budget. The match that you've all heard so much about that I really have to thank Drew McKnight and Tito's and the Mays for providing to help us raise that $600K. We're super excited that we're $15,000 away from that final match. So this is basically $570,000 out of the $600 raise. So we're really excited to be coming into the new year in a strong financial position to continue to develop this work. So if anyone is so inclined, our donation site, I'm gonna stop now, hand it off to my sister, Sydney, to wrap us up. But I just really wanna say, again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for the tremendous financial support to be able to come into the new year strong. Thank you so much for coming. And, I said it after the event last year, and I was sort of alluding to this earlier, but, there for some time in SOUNDOFF was perhaps a little bit of what we call imposter syndrome. That I had a vision for something, I was working it, I was asking people for money for it, and it took some time. And so I would periodically get a little nervous of when am I going to get the question from the Mays or the Hicksons or the Titos or whoever saying, hey dude, like where's our, show me what we're doing here. And resoundingly, that has not been the experience. Resoundingly, the supporters of this organization have understood what we're doing, the time it takes, the investment necessary to build this, and I just certainly hope that now with these types of successes, with this type of recognition by a not easy organization like the VA, that, you know, you can see that investment paying off. So I just want to say thank you all so much, and Sid, I'll hand it off to you.
Dear SOUNDOFF community, my wife first heard about SOUNDOFF from a TV interview on Veterans Day 2019. We were engaged at that point, and even then she knew I was a little off during Veterans Day, so she encouraged me to install the app. I didn't use it, but I always knew it was there. Fast forward to June 2020, and we are now married, and that was when I got the news about McCoy. McCoy was a soldier of mine back during a 2010-2011 Afghanistan deployment, and in June of 2020, he was arrested and charged with murder. This really set me back. I could feel the storm coming. But now I was married. I was not just alone in my small condo. I could not put my wife through this nonsense. So I reached out. I opened the SOUNDOFF app and selected Susan as my SOUNDOFF clinician. I explained my fairly textbook PTSD, anger, rage, drinking, fighting, isolation, guilt. My God, the guilt. This was not my first bout of the storm. I left the Army in 2012 and would eventually receive a disability rating from the VA for PTSD, among other things. I had received treatment from the VA in the primary form of medication. The medications did numb me to all feelings, but this made me feel only half human, half alive. I also searched for social support and went to a VFW and an American Legion, but just didn't fit in. I also reached out to Wounded Warrior Project, tried a few churches, and even went to a yoga session, but I just didn't fit in. Eventually, I chose to get off the meds and resumed a very solitary, work-focused, semi-alcoholic life for nearly 5 years. I cannot express enough my gratitude for SOUNDOFF. And how highly I would and have recommend them. I quickly decided to transition to meeting in person with Susan, and I have been doing so for 5 months now. It has been challenging and transformative. After getting married, I have begun to re-enter the civilian world, and I don't know how I would have made it through some difficult things without SOUNDOFF and Susan. It's simple but difficult things for a vet with PTSD, getting bumped in the supermarket, or learning how to better handle road rage. I honestly don't if I would have kept my job, kept my sanity, and kept my marriage during COVID and after McCoy without SOUNDOFF. I hope you can share this letter with sponsors and donors so that they can be reassured their giving is helping veterans like myself. As I have mentioned, I had reached out to a number of veterans groups, the VA, and other places, but this is the first time I've actually received support that helped me in a meaningful way. I encourage your donors and sponsors to be generous during this most difficult time of COVID. It is precisely at these times of national crisis when vets like me tend to slip through the cracks. I think it is no coincidence that McCoy lost access to his VA treatment during COVID and then did what he did. I hope my testimony can be of some small value to SOUNDOFF and hope others can be inspired to do the same in a more impactful way. Grateful beyond words. Brown Fox 286. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that concludes our luncheon today. I am so thankful that y'all are all here. Thank you so much for the support and for our mission of SOUNDOFF, and another very special thank you to the veterans in the room today. Veterans Day is always a very deeply meaningful day for me and my kids. So thank you again, and everyone have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you so much for tuning in. to learn how SOUNDOFF continues to support those who have served on their terms. We hope you'll consider supporting and have a wonderful Veterans Day.